Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons. I am very pleased that you have tuned into the podcast via whatever device you are tuning in. This week is a little bit of a shift in gears away from some of the hardcore political stuff. I started this podcast and called it the Nostalgia Trap for a lot of different reasons, but one of the nostalgia traps for me, my own kind of distorted reality, comes from being raised in the 1990s, being a teenager in the early 1990s, and being subjected to the so-called alternative rock scene that emerged out of Seattle. The typical characters of Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and Blind Melon and all the big MTV bands, along with a lot of others, weighed heavily on my teenage years. And I still think about the 1990s as kind of formative for a lot of different reasons. One of which is that those bands and that counterculture that was available, just on MTV, provided a different model for masculinity than the one that I was presented through the men that were around me growing up, and through the guys that look very like jockey or sporty or surfy guys that were at my high school. These dudes that were in these bands seemed to, prize being smart and funny and weird and alienated, and all that stuff was still cool. And those bands, I think, for me and for a lot of people, showed us, how you could be a cool dude without being a jock and without being a misogynist and without being what we perceived to be assholes. So, I wanted to have my guests on today to talk a little bit about that, about their experience, because I think their memories of the 90s coincide with mine. Their names are John and Joe Lombardo, the Lombardo brothers. They're kind of, I think of them as legendary figures from my local scene in Ventura, California. I met John and Joe originally in the early 90s or mid 90s when I was working at Marie Callender's in Ventura, California. Marie Callender's, for those of you that don't know, is kind of like a chain of country-themed, old-fashioned pot pie kind of oriented restaurants. And when I was working there, John, I knew, had just come off tour as the lead singer and guitar player for a band called Pinching Judy, and he had just been on tour with Gin Blossoms, and this was just massively impressive to me as a 16-year-old who was into the Gin Blossoms and knew their songs very well. And Joe is someone who I associated mainly with a scene called 86 Hastings. 86 Hastings is the address of a house in Ventura, California that's become, over the last, I would say, 20 years or so, at least 20, maybe 25 years, maybe 30 years, been the kind of center of the hipster counterculture in Ventura, California. This house, rather than a bar or a coffee house or something like that, this house is a place that houses a lot of different people over the years. There have been a lot of different, social gatherings there. I think I mentioned that I drank my first beer at this house. And there's art that Joe talks a lot about that hangs on the walls there that tell the kind of history of that development and the development of that little counterculture. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is with Joe and John Lombardo. They're going to tell about their experiences with music and how the early punk scene and then what became the alternative rock scene in the early 90s really kind of helped shape their identity and gave them a direction in life that I think was similar to what I was looking for, which was a direction that was cool and hip and smart and funny and weird, but didn't perhaps fit into the traditional models of American masculinity. And that's something that I'm kind of concerned with a lot as a kid that was bullied by the jocks throughout middle school and high school. Music is how we got our revenge, and I think Joe and John have a lot to say about that. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. You can find more Nostalgia Trap podcast stuff at nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com. The podcast is also on Stitcher.com, Stitcher Radio Network. You can also like the page on Facebook. Find Nostalgia Trap on iTunes, where you can download all the episodes to all your various devices. Thanks again for listening. This is Joe and John Lombardo. Oh, and one more thing before I let you listen to the conversation. I was actually in Ventura when I talked to Joe and John, and I didn't have all my microphones with me, so I had to procure a microphone at Best Buy, which was gracious enough to allow me to return that microphone when I discovered it didn't work very well. So my voice is a little quiet on this one. I hope you can bear with it. I think it's totally audible, and Joe and John come through loud and clear. So again, I hope you enjoy this conversation.
So when we got our first group of friends, we started hanging out with people. I think that back then, initially, I remember listening to the Police and Led Zeppelin.
But we had really been. Our sister was 7 years older than me and 9 years older than John, and so we grew up listening to her music, really, which was like the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt, Elton John, and
singer-songwriters of the 70s.
Yeah,
yes.
Jackson Brown, all that stuff.
That was the golden age of music.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I agree with you. Did you?
And stunts.
And stunts.
Yeah.
And music-related stunts.
Right.
That brings us back to Styx. Did you guys skateboard?
Yeah. I skateboarded all the time.
And did that like drive a little bit of like some sort of was there like there's such a cultural identification with skateboarding, and like during that time it seems like there was even more so.
For us, it was the other way around. We were into BMX bikes, and we were kind of just doing the run-of-the-mill kid thing.
Right.
And George Hatfield was the guy's name. He brought over a Devo record. And we started getting into Devo, and Devo was the gateway into punk rock for us.
Yeah.
Then we heard the Sex Pistols.
We used to steal music. I used to get out of school at Anacapa, and I'd go over to the warehouse across the street, and I had this system of stealing. But I would.
The warehouse is WHER.
That's correct. And we can admit these crimes now because these businesses no longer exist.
Right.
In fact, the things we were stealing no longer exist.
The warehouse was where? Like at the mall?
It was at the mall. It's like
it was where Bevmo is now.
Yeah. And so I would go over there, and if something looked interesting to me, I would take a handful of cassette tapes, probably like 6 or 7, and I'd look through them, sort of feigning interest, and then I'd drop them, and then I'd take 2 or 3 and stick them in my socks, and take the other 4 and put them back.
These are tapes?
Cassette tapes, yeah. And then I'd leave quickly.
Tapes were easier to steal.
Yeah.
So he would bring home stuff like the Ramones. I mean, he
Sex
accidentally
Pistols.
brought home the Pistols and the Ramones. And I remember sitting in your room putting on that Sex Pistols tape and going, that was it.
It was dark, you know. It was like
it was scary.
You dipped yourself in something murky, and then afterward, like you kind of wanted to take a bath because it was, coming from, the Eagles and
a very kind of like watered down hippie kind of
very
landscape
mellow
of music.
Yeah.
And punk rock was actually frightening to the mainstream.
Right.
People were actually afraid of it. It was on the news. It was
Yeah.
scary. And so I believe that obviously we didn't know this. We were just kids, but I believe being outsiders our whole life, it gave us like a thing to get behind. Fuck
right.
everybody else.
Because-
We're outsiders.
Because it was other outsiders that you connected with.
So do you start dressing differently when you discover this stuff?
When I was 13, I shaved my head and my dad grounded me for the whole summer.
I started wearing rainbow suspenders.
Was that before or after you were accepted by the
short
hardcores?
shorts? Right around the same time.
Joe used to backwards skate to the halls at school with his rainbow suspenders on.
I used to go to skating.
His
Plus.
Doug Henning T-shirt.
Just before I went fucking punk,
Yeah.
I used to go to Skating Plus and win backwards skates and speed skates and win free pizza.
Did you do that thing where you went through the cones real fast?
Yeah. Well, I went.
He was a
around
good skater.
And you wore like the socks with the stripes on them?
No, but I did wear my sister's jeans. She had this pair of I think they're called Britannia jeans, and they were kind of rust corduroy, a little too tight. And I used to wear those with a dress shirt and my feathered hair. Everybody had the big comb in the back pocket. Yeah,
I'm wearing those jeans right now.
Oh my god, indeed you are.
So we sort of music. We went into I got into surfing and skateboarding a lot. Joey didn't surf, but we all rode skateboards. But music came first for us. We got into punk rock and then got into those things.
It was like something that slapped you in the face and sort of woke you up.
Were other kids at school into this stuff? A few of them.
A few of them.
Yeah.
And then those kids were were more interesting, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And what made you? Did you find other kids? Did you have a pack of punk?
Yeah,
friends
absolutely.
after a
And
while?
I also think, look, maybe they were more interesting, but the fact of the matter was we were getting into the point where we would look at the jocks.
Yeah.
And the people that were like entrenched in the school communities, and we
popular
knew
ones.
we were never going to get in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? We didn't belong there. We found our place on that fringe.
Yeah.
That's what punk rock was back then.
Yeah.
It really was that.
Do you feel like it had like a class element to it too? Like you're like the punk,
Yeah.
like you're not
Yeah.
the rich kids basically.
Right.
And, like,
And so
punk
it was-
is
in fact,
working class.
In fact, you would be shunned by punk rockers if you were rich. Most
Well,
likely.
there in high school there were kids who were rich that had like all the bondage
like
pants.
Curtis Paneria.
Don't name any names here, but all the gear.
Yeah, yeah.
And so and
what is the gear? What was the gear?
You know,
then?
like leather jackets,
Uh-huh.
like new leather jackets.
Doc Martens and Creepers were not cheap. You know.
Right, right, yeah.
And you couldn't go to Hot Topic and get this stuff. You had to go down to L.A.
Melrose.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
The
yeah.
only place you get that stuff was Melrose Avenue. We went down there once and bought stuff. I remember coming back from Melrose and walking through the living room in my fishnet shirt.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
hair was dyed black, and my dad just sitting in his chair. And this is what he said as I walked across the room. He goes, "Jesus Christ, what did I raise?"
He came. We were all getting ready to go out one night. A bunch of my friends, and we're down in my room. My room was in this bottom room attached to the garage. It was like a 3-level townhome, and so we were down there all dressed up, ready to go out. I think we're gonna go to see some bands or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we probably were.
And so we had like this. We used to put eyeliner on and smear it, and the bleached hair and different colors and all this. And we heard my dad shuffling down the stairs. Remember that? He comes downstairs, and I remember his breathing, just taking it in, you know. And he looked at us and he said, If I saw you walking down the street, I'd be looking to pick a fight with you. What do you say? You guys look like a bunch of freaks.
Oh yeah, you look a bunch of freaks. I've been looking to kick your ass. That's
And
what it was.
so we left. And
So how much of punk then for you guys was driven about like literally the stereotype of like I've got to prove something or like against my father kind of thing?
Well,
it becomes like the stereotype of punk
yeah.
in a lot of ways.
You could do that with punk then. I mean,
Yeah.
now if you dress now like we did when we were teenagers,
Yeah.
there's kids on the Disney Channel that look like you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a total.
You
but
like
back
it-
then, nobody did it.
Right, right.
You
That's
couldn't-
what's interesting about it is it's almost like the 80s repeated the 50s in some respects. Like it was like the country had already gone through this like the hippies kind of breaking out of the father knows best
Yeah.
of the 50s, but then there's still a conservative culture in the 80s, and punk comes along as like a new way of kind of countering that. If
Yeah.
that makes sense, right?
Yeah, and the whole scene, like the dress,
Yeah.
and the crazy hairdos, and the music was so. It was just this great vehicle to focus your energy into that stuff, and say, screw you to everybody.
You can say fuck you if you want.
I don't cuss.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Where were the venues? Where were you seeing music in Ventura? Where besides Ventura Theater? I mean,
Primarily in our minds.
Yes.
No, we used to go up to Santa Barbara to the Goleta Valley Community Center.
There's a lot of stuff in L.A.
There was the Arlington.
Yeah.
We go. There was stuff around here too. We saw a
There's
lot
no
of.
punk shows at the Arlington.
No, what was it called? Not the Arlington in Santa Barbara. What's
There
it
was
called?
Casa de la Raza.
That's it, Casa de la Raza. Sorry.
And,
there were punk rock shows at the Arlington, weren't there?
I don't think
No,
so.
it's a theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
There were places here, like the Philippine Hut had a lot of punk rock
That was
shows.
in Oxnard, Philippine Hut. Then like around 82, 83, there Casa Tropical opens up, and it's at the airport in Oxnard. It's this kind of Quonset hut restaurant or something.
Right.
And then at nighttime, they'd have these crazy punk shows with like really, big names in that world.
Who were these names? Do you remember any of the names of the bands
Yeah.
you were seeing?
Youth Brigade,
Yeah.
Bad Religion, Dead
Yeah.
Kennedys,
Peter
Yeah,
Test Tube
yeah.
Babies, and I'm trying to think of
Misfits.
Bad Religion's still around.
Yeah.
aren't
They are.
They're
I
still
saw them a
doing
few
it.
years ago. They're incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're still doing it. Aren't those
Yeah.
guys like PhDs or something like
Well,
that?
the singer,
Greg
he
Graffin.
teaches I think he
Yeah.
teaches at UCLA, right?
No, he teaches at Princeton.
Crazy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So as those spaces became places that you hung out, like was it more? How much about was it the music, and how much was like about finding like a community kind of?
Well,
there?
that was the.
And when did you start playing music? I know both of you play instruments.
I started singing in my first punk rock band when I was 13.
So like part of it was like I want to do this. I don't just want to like.
But you could do it. Like the bands like the Ramones and these other, all these punk bands, they couldn't play well.
Yeah.
It was like 3-chord stuff, and you could sit down. I remember sitting down. A friend of mine lent me his bass, Tyler Cam, for the weekend or something, and I sat down and I figured out Black Flag, Louie Louie, and a Ramones song or something. And it's just 3 chords. You could do it, and all of a sudden I know a song. And then you like, hey, let's start a band. I know 3 chords too, and then you just start playing, and then all of a sudden it started to happen. I'd never played out in any punk bands really, but I think the other bands it would probably be a similar story. So I remember he got his first guitar when he was 10.
You know, it's the first song I tried to learn on the guitar. Right is Right by
Shattered Faith.
Shattered Faith. Yeah.
How did you get your first guitar? Like, what was the impetus behind that? Did you steal it from the warehouse?
No. My first guitar, and I can admit this because my mother knows this, I found a bag of money hidden in my parents' house. My mom had been socking money away. So I took this bag of money.
I remember that.
And I had like $300 or something.
Yeah.
And my band, the guys I played with, said, Dave Casillas said, well, let's all go. We're like, let's, John, use the money. We'll go to Magic Mountain. And I'm like, I don't know about that. And Dave Casillas said, if you take us all to Magic Mountain, I'll give you my guitar. That black guitar with the Battalion of Saints.
Oh, yeah.
And that was my first guitar. It was a fake Gibson Les Paul. It was black guitar. And so I took my friends and I to, to
Magic Mountain.
And then about 2 months later, my mom started going, "Where's that money I had hidden around?"
It's at Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
Did you have an amp?
No.
No. So you just had an electric guitar, and I mean,
3 chords and the truth.
Right. That's all you need.
Yeah. Man. That's what Bono says.
I started learning the guitar once I saw that you could learn it on YouTube.
Yeah.
So YouTube is not around.
No,
so
it's
how
not.
Are you
Thank God.
How are you learning chords?
You have a tape cassette in your player, and you listen to the song, and then you stop it, and rewind it, and play it again, and figure it out.
Well, I actually took guitar lessons from that guy at Hex. Right. So I learned like an A chord, and this is a funny thing about learning the guitar.
Yeah.
So I learned an A chord, and a G chord, and a D chord, and I would play those, right? Mm-hmm. And then I would listen to punk rock albums and go, wow, how are they doing this?
Yeah.
Those are not. And Paul Miller showed me bar chords. Oh, yeah. And I remember just going, you mean you can play anywhere on there like that?
Yeah.
It was insane.
I just had that conversation with my son Peter today at home. He's playing these chords, and he was trying to learn Nirvana doing the Bowie song. What's the Bowie song?
Man Who Sold the World.
Yeah. So he's trying to learn that, and he's like, I can't get it. And I go, well, just play bar chords. And he's like, I can't play them. They're too hard. I'm like, Peter, if you play the bar chord, you can play it anywhere up the neck. It's easy.
And they're the hardest to learn, though.
Well, it takes a lot. You have to press down.
And you know what? When actually the first time, and I don't know if you remember this, John, but the first time I ever held a guitar in my hands was at your place.
Oh, really?
After a Marie Callender shift, I went over to your house or wherever you were staying at the time. And you showed me You tried to show me.
Could have been anywhere.
Yeah, could have been anywhere. It was in that alley next to Star Lounge.
I remember I had my friends come and take your stereo out of your car while we were. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, no, yeah.
Good times.
You owe me for that, and you also owe me for what happened at your house, which was you showed me bar chords, and I thought they were so impossible that it made me want to just never learn guitar afterwards. So your first lesson to me taught me how to hate the guitar.
Yeah, okay. That was my goal.
So
the way I learned how to play, my sister had this Eagles songbook, and it actually showed
I hear about these songbooks.
It shows where you put your fingers on the neck and at the fret, and I would sit there and learn that. I remember learning Desperado and Take It to the Limit.
How did you relate to the Eagles and because punk is so punk always positions itself so much against like hippies. And wasn't there like a hippie scene here in Ventura?
Well,
there was
quite a bit of like stoners, people still listening to like Hendrix and all that kind of stuff.
Well, then we get people start getting into like AC/DC and Sabbath and Foreigner,
right.
And actually in high school, at the height of all this angst and rebellion, the guys that were into like the hardcore metal stuff, like I shouldn't lump AC/DC in with Foreigner, but like AC/DC and Sabbath and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, all these guys there was a commonality between the punks and these metal dudes.
The Heshers?
Yeah.
Heshers,
And
yeah.
it was the guys that had like the mullets and drove Camaros
but that was more like Loverboy and Bon
they
Jovi.
They would give us shit, you know. But these other guys, I remember going to this one party with this guy. I was with some friends. We went to this party. This kid, Sean Stegmeyer. He was like Spicoli from.
Yeah, Sean Stegmeyer, who ended up committing suicide, right?
Blew
his brains out with a shotgun.
But he
really,
yeah, he was a great guy.
Here in Ventura.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
And
I feel like Ventura is filled with stories like that.
It is.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many friends we have that killed themselves.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
Our friend Gus Brown hung himself in his girlfriend's tree.
No, garage.
When we were like 18.
Well, he was like 15 or 16.
These are the heartwarming stories I wanted to
Well,
hear.
you've got this culture down at the beach and like in the avenue, like this sort of,
I feel like in a lot of ways, and I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but as you move up the coast from LA, like Ventura is the first place where things start to turn into this kind of like, I don't know, like almost like San Francisco, this kind of junky, homeless, more aggressive.
I think Oxnard and Wainimi are the beginning of that.
Yeah, but then you've got like the people
Thousand
that
Oaks is certainly not that.
No, that's an affluent community full of achievers.
and especially Pumpkin Town as well.
Yeah, beautiful place.
But you go up on the hill and you've got money and the lawmakers in this city. It's a very conservative place.
Yeah. Which is weird because Ventura also has this culture that's not conservative at all.
No, it's totally Birkenstocks and.
Yeah, right.
Does anybody remember what Birkenstocks are?
They're coming back. They're coming back.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I've always thought this was super weird.
Yeah.
Because if you look at, and I'm only talking about our beach culture here in Ventura, in the Pierpont area.
Yes.
It's been the same since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Well, and Silver Strand too.
But you know, Pierpont is an affluent neighborhood. You got to have money to live there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And yet there's this gang culture there. Mm-hmm. It's such a weird thing.
Yeah.
Usually gangs thrive in the slums, you know,
and like poverty,
the ghettos,
those conditions.
But I think that's true in a lot of these beach communities because like Venice. There's really nice parts of Venice, and then you've got like this whole other element there. And
let's get back to talking about me.
Yeah.
Oh,
please.
I'm sorry.
I felt like distracted there a little bit. I'm like, what's going on?
Can we please get back to talking about Styx?
I'm Kilroy.
So wait.
Sing for the day. Sing. Sorry.
That's all right. You can finish that if you want.
No, that's all right. I'll finish this.
You had a thought going.
I'll finish this beer, David.
Please. It looks like you're just starting it.
Yeah. Well.
So you know, at what point do you start a band that's not punk? Because by the time I get to know you guys, you are John, part of a.
I still was John. Yes.
Yeah, you were John. You were part of a what I would call like part of the '90s alternative thing. Like you were.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't you like tour with? This is what I remember, and why I thought you guys were so famous. Well, mainly John.
Yeah, I'm nobody.
I knew you had the connection to Richard Simmons.
Thank you.
Beyond that. You had this band called Pinching Judy.
That's correct.
That toured with the Gin Blossoms. Or is that right? Or you played with the Gin Blossoms?
Oh, we did several tours with the Gin Blossoms.
Right, and hearing that to me when I was a kid was amazing.
And
You were a huge
time.
Gin Blossoms fan, weren't you?
I actually was. And those are probably some of the first songs I learned on acoustic guitar too. Seriously.
Well, those were catchy, good, radio-ready songs,
They're
man.
actually really good songs.
Yeah.
Like going back to a lot of that stuff, and I don't know. That's a part of why I think of this show, the nostalgia trap, because you know there's this kind of like when you're in that scene, you remember it very fondly, and you kind of it becomes special to you, and that kind of clouds your judgment of it.
Yeah.
But when I listen to a lot of that '90s music,
that was
included. It's
that was the
amazing
last.
songwriting.
That was the last great moment in rock and roll.
I feel that too.
It was. I mean, you tell me somebody
Gin
since
Blossoms?
No, just that early '90s thing. You tell me the whole Pearl Jam thing and the Nirvana thing.
Yeah.
So what bands have come along since then that have made that kind of impact? And I like, is there gonna? I mean, whether or not you're a fan, there are no Guns N' Roses now. Bands that just everybody's blown away by, and
part of it is that they were dying too. Like the people that were doing this music, just like the '60s generation, were like such intense people that they were actually living dangerous lives. You know, I feel like that
you can't imagine any like One Direction trash in their hotel room.
I don't even know who that is, Joe.
Well, they with the program.
They can do it. One Direction does trash their hotel room, but they do it digitally with Pro Tools.
My
it looks great. It really is.
They actually go in and they clean it. They clean their hotel room.
What has happened with technology has
made it more technical.
Taken over music.
I noticed
it started with video technology.
Yeah.
And then now with digital technology has really turned music into a product.
Mm-hmm.
And music used to be shit people created in the garage that expressed emotions and was a way to...
And it's turned it into this like bite-sized, one song thing. Where it used to be like you had these bands that played and played and played. You develop a following. You have to sell your records out of your van or whatever.
The business model is totally different.
Yeah, totally different now.
I don't even know if there is a business model now.
What you do to succeed, you're right. It's completely different, and now the music you can hear it. It's built from familiar components.
Well, yeah. And
whatever.
It makes me wonder if there will be. I mean, there has to be another renaissance like we had in the early '90s. And I mean, maybe it'll have technology. Maybe it's happening already. I don't know. I'm tapped out of it.
I think the coolest thing about the technological thing is like what you're doing here, doing this show. Anybody can do it. You can make.
I didn't turn this on yet.
Oh, son of a bitch! I've wasted all my A material on nothing.
This is just the warm up.
Yeah, this is.
But anybody can do it, and that levels the playing field. Like back in the punk rock days, all of a sudden you could go make your own album. You taught yourself how to play. You can go make your own album. You sell your own stuff. It was all underground, word of mouth, and these bands got huge. Like, Minor Threat and Ian MacKaye started Discord and always charged like $5 a record or $5 a ticket to go see them.
Well, I think of the Grateful Dead and trading tapes and that kind of stuff. I wonder a lot about that kind of stuff because technology is just a tool in a lot of ways. We can find some way for that culture to come back through that. It feels like it doesn't ruin everything.
Well, you hope that there's some kids in their garage that are going to do something unique and amazing.
So,
I hope so.
How did you find your
revolutionize music?
Yeah, how did you do that?
Oh my God, we're going to be for hours.
So you started out loving punk rock, but the band that I know you from, that you gave me the CD of that I listened to so many years ago is not a punk band.
No, and to be true,
that's what I want to kind of get to because you were a part of a culture that like was kind of bridging a lot of different things.
Well, it's funny because this comes back now in my life. A lot of my friends I have a lot of friends that are still dressing, looking, acting, and listening to the same music they were listening to in the 80s. They're like, I have a lot of friends that are into punk rock still.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just telling you the truth. I outgrew punk rock.
Yeah.
I did. I love music. I love songwriting, and I love punk rock. But I also loved Bob Dylan and U2 and a bunch of other bands. And then as I started getting into making music when I got older, and I wanted to be in a band, and I just wrote songs. And I didn't say they've got to be punk. They got to be, And I actually got a lot of crap from a lot of people for that.
Yeah.
But so we started writing songs, and I started putting a band together and working with other guys that were good musicians, and we just loved music. We loved punk rock, but we also loved Rush, and we loved U2, and we loved Bob Dylan, and we loved Stevie Ray Vaughan, and we just loved music.
You could do punk rock like we were talking about, just learn the chords and play it, and it was fast and aggressive. But then I think most of the musicians that I know from that time, if you want to become a better musician and you really liked music, you sort of outgrew that kind of remedial playing and those tastes, and then you become more interested and open to other kinds. I remember thinking back then, like it's very closed-minded. I remember thinking like like they say if it ain't country, it ain't shit.
Right.
Well, it's kind of the same thing. If it ain't punk, it ain't shit. And so
there was an ideological purity to it that limited.
Right.
the expressive possibility.
A lot of my friends made fun of like Something for Nothing and stuff like that.
Well, because so stepping back, so his band Something for Nothing started out as this Ventura punk band, and they sort of, as they progressed and got better musically, their sound changed, and they became interested in bands that were changing too. Like Stiff Little Fingers was huge
the thing for me. It was Stiff Little Fingers. I heard this band. I don't know if you heard those Stiff Little Fingers, but I went, oh my God, I can play punk rock style music with incredible pop
and the
hooks.
Clash too.
Right.
The Clash was huge. You listen to Stiff Little Fingers and
the Clash
and
are the Beatles of punk rock.
Couple albums, and it's just shitty, thrashy stuff. And then you listen to like London Calling or Sandinista.
It's a lot more melodic.
They grew as musicians, and they became interested in other types of music.
But it's always great songs. Even the first Clash album, there's always great songwriting in it.
Well, and there's a sensibility beyond just like the raw anger of punk, too.
Right.
Like,
that gets old. It's like
you guys both had. I mean, this is what I think why I found you guys so appealing when I was young was your sense of humor. And
I thought it was my firm buttocks.
That too.
Okay.
That was like the first thing. But then when I got to know you, it was so much more than that, and the humor, and particularly like that kind of '90s, whatever you want to call that sensibility.
It was like a cynical.
It's called snark.
Yeah, I guess that's what the word is for it now. But like you guys, you had this kind of like, I guess now I look at it as kind of a punk sensibility in a sense, like a punk humor without the self-seriousness of punk.
It was you had to be a little self-effacing, but you had to be able to, a lot of sarcasm. A lot of like poking fun at stuff that wasn't cool and wasn't hip, because there's a whole bunch of adolescent kids trying to make themselves feel better and be cool and be relevant, and you do that just by saying, "Oh, look how lame that person is," and making fun of this trend or that. Trendy is like now the thing to be.
Yes.
Back then, if in our group,
following a trend was seen as
if
like
somebody called you trendy, you'd
yeah.
want to like punch them in the face. But.
It's really an interesting thing to me, and maybe I'm just old, but I think it's horrifying that so many kids and artists and musicians. I mean, to me, if you look at hip hop, they look, dress, sound, act, gesture the same for 20 years, and they still sell records. It's like if
it ain't broke,
I don't get how you reproduce something over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's still.
It's evolved a little bit, but it's still like there are basic elements of it. You're right. It's like a consistent
so weird
style
to me.
to it.
And you listen to old hip hop. I don't know if this is on topic, but listen to old hip hop, and it's so tame.
Yeah.
It's like listening to the Sex Pistols now, and it was so outrageous at the time, and like now it sounds like
that's
50s rock and roll.
That's still a great album, though.
It is a fantastic album.
Yeah, some of that stuff is timeless.
But it's not as like,
it doesn't have the like cutting like shock of what we
and it's not because
we're accustomed to now.
It hasn't like. I don't know. Maybe my ears have.
You're just a curmudgeonly old man.
It's true.
Well, that's kind of goes back to what I was saying about the last great moment in rock and roll. You think about music now. There's still as much of it as there ever was.
Yeah.
But there is nothing, and for me, it's been a long time since there's been something you're going, wow, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
And that's what the Sex Pistols were, and that's what punk rock was.
Well, have you heard One Direction? Have you checked that out? Have you got their latest stuff?
You said you hadn't heard of them.
Yeah. Dave, I said I haven't heard this before, not God, I hope I never hear this again. It's a big difference.
So for me to, the flip side of what I said before about the technology being cool where anybody can do it, it also allows anybody to do it. And people, a lot of shit.
It's a good thing and a bad thing.
It becomes, it's just the internet in general.
Yeah.
And that like every voice is there, and it becomes like sifting and getting to the good stuff is a lot harder, I guess. I mean, it's just a different way of finding it, because you talk about. I remember someone, playing an Elvis Costello record for me when I was young. I never heard it before. Mm-hmm. It was like finding it at someone's house. And it was like someone had to actually grab me and listen to this, And the same with REM and a lot of different bands that I never would have known existed unless someone had actually played them for me. And I think people have a different path now.
And you would actually sit down with your new record, or somebody loaned it to you, and if it was a double album, you'd open it up and look through the liner notes, and you'd read it as the music's going. And
there was a slower ritual,
and it wasn't as readily available either. So
you coveted it.
Yeah, you had to go looking for it.
Yeah, with it like slowly, and it wasn't just like it's on the radio or on YouTube or on Spotify or something. You hear it, and then you're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Well, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she's into some of the pop music stuff, and I can tell you it's an interesting thing that's happening with bands like One Direction and like 5 Seconds of Summer. You heard of them?
Yeah.
These guys, obviously,
These guys.
they're just a bunch of kids being told what to do. They're a product.
Yeah.
I mean, they're on Nabisco
They're
packages.
like the new monkey.
They're on, yeah. They're like the Nabisco. They're on Nabisco packages at the store, and they have One Direction perfume. You know, I tell my daughter, I
The
go.
latest album is called Chipotle.
I told my daughter, I go, do you think these 20-year-old guys are sitting down together going, let's make a fragrance?
Yeah.
They're being paid a fortune to put their face on a perfume because they know a bunch of 12-year-olds will buy it.
Right.
It's a product.
Yeah.
But it's brilliant.
Ultimately, those 5 20-year-olds have no power whatsoever.
They don't, but they make a lot of money,
Yeah.
and their faces draw. But I'll tell you something, it's brilliant. The people producing them are brilliant because what they're doing is, if you listen close to their music, they're taking hooks from The Who.
Yeah.
And Led Zeppelin, or that these kids have never heard before, that sounds new to them because they don't know what the hell they're listening to.
Yeah.
And it sounds like One Direction's making this great rock pop stuff, and they're just taking stuff from other people.
You know, there was a student in one of my classes who thought that the Beatles were the band from the video game, the Beatles rock band, that they were a band that had been created for the video game.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, they make this whole
Yeah.
backstory of like the 60s, and I'm like, no, that actually happened.
Yeah.
That really happened. Yeah, it's really weird.
Wow.
Yeah.
I met a 23-year-old girl 2 years ago in Las Vegas who
I bet you did.
she'd never heard of Frank Sinatra.
She'd never heard of Frank Sinatra?
Yeah.
Isn't there a major avenue in Las Vegas named after Frank Sinatra?
There are several things named
You mean
after
the
Frank Sinatra.
street?
She did not. She had never heard of Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, that's tragic. Well, I don't know how.
That's what I told her. I said, you have been
Did you have a
abused.
relationship to that music, Frank Sinatra? Like, how does that fit into like the punk and everything? I actually remember you guys like liking that stuff.
Frank Sinatra's
Yeah.
my favorite singer ever. And you know, he's very punk rock.
Well, who said that? Who said one?
The Rat Pack was very
some
punk rock.
icon in punk
Yeah.
rock said like Jim Morrison was punk rock, and these different people that kind of pushed the envelope. Elvis Presley, maybe. I
Yeah,
forgot
right.
who said it, but anybody that kind of pushed through the mainstream soup, you know, to come out and be their own person and have their own sound.
Yeah.
Whoever said this, so they attributed punk rock to that, and it's kind of true.
Yeah, the Rat Pack thing is like, you're right. When I hear like the Dean Martin song, "I Love Vegas," he's just talking about like I like to just get drunk and screw, and like I mean the way they are is like kind of, there's an outlaw sensibility to it.
Well, yeah, when they did their whole Rat Pack thing, it was, if you watch any of that stuff, it's amazing. It's just a bunch of friends getting up, and they happen to be able to sing. They could have juggled, you know,
Right.
but they go up and they do their show. And the reason that everybody loved it is because they had a great time up there on stage. I don't think they cared that the people were watching them. And
You know, the thing about Frank Sinatra,
Yeah.
and this is why he's punk. He was a pop star when he was a kid, and then he became a movie star.
Right.
And he was huge.
I mean, he had like phases of his career.
Well,
Right.
Yeah.
And by the time he was 30, he was a has-been.
Yeah,
Nobody
yeah.
would touch him.
Yeah.
The whole world said, fuck you,
Yeah.
to Frank Sinatra. And Frank Sinatra was this punk fighter, tough little Italian
From
kid
Hoboken.
from Hoboken, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And he didn't take kindly to that.
Yeah.
So he had a couple of shots to get back on top, and he took them and he did what he had to do. And when he got back on top, you know what he said to the rest of the world? Fuck you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to do
I'm going to do it my way.
That's why Anka wrote the song for him. But that's what's punk rock about him. I always liked Sinatra.
Sid Vicious did that song.
Yeah.
And it's
My Way, yeah.
Goodfellas, right?
Yeah, right.
And it kind of hits on that connection between punk.
It's an iconic moment in film.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he was totally. I always dug Sinatra.
Yeah.
He's a great singer.
Well, we grew up with him too.
Yeah.
You know, our dad.
Yeah.
You know, our
See,
parents.
that's what's interesting is you were like, your dad had a Frank Sinatra sensibility.
Yeah.
You guys came in with the actual punk, and he's hating you on the couch for doing it.
Yeah.
But you're still liking Frank Sinatra, like all of you.
But my dad grew up, and he was at that time. He told us a story where he went to take a girl out on a date. He went to pick her up, and he had this guy. The father comes to the door and says, "My daughter's not dating a greaseball," and slammed the door in his face.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had that sort of that kind of discrimination,
underdog, fuck you
and
kind of attitude.
And he was a scrapper. Like there's my mom told us a story when we were little. This guy was riding his tail or something, a truck driver.
Yeah.
And my dad flipped him off or did something like that. So this is somewhere in Arizona, I guess. He pulls over on the side of the road. The truck driver pulls off, and so my dad puts his foot on the side of back on the tire.
Yeah.
And the guy comes up to him, and my dad was only 5'8" or 5'9".
5'9", yeah.
And the guy comes up, and he's pretty big dude, and my dad jumped up and knocked him out. He did that with another guy. So anyway, he came up with this. He was the youngest child of like 6, I think, 5 or 6, and so he always was hustling and scrambling and trying to, And so
when he was 75, my sister was dating a guy.
Yeah.
She was 21, and this guy was 23.
Right.
Okay, and this guy
he was probably like 33,
whatever he was. This guy had a cast on his arm, and they were having a fight in the car, and he whacked my sister over the head with the cast.
Jesus.
So she like freaked out, called the police. They all came down. My dad went down there and like went after the guy, and the cops held him back and said, "Mr. Lombardo, stay cool," And he said, "I'm okay." And as soon as the cops released him, my dad clocked him and decked him. He was 75 years old.
75.
And
he had a sense of this is what was necessary.
He decked that guy.
And he had a really strong sense of family.
Yeah.
And so even though like we rebelled against our parents and all that stuff, home was always a safe place, Even though I didn't want to be there. But there was no like fear of being at home.
Right. There's like it seems like the rebellion was cultural in a lot of ways, beyond not necessarily personal.
And there was he was like having a grandfather around when we were growing up, and so I think a lot of that sort of not knowing where to be and who to relate to kind of was the impetus to sort of here's this thing, it's exciting and rebellious and we'll jump into this, and there's a community there. You asked about that earlier, and that was a cool thing. Like you'd go to these shows and you'd stage dive or you'd be in the pit and you'd fall down and people would pick you up. And then there was this community happening, and then very soon it started being about like idiots shaving their heads and coming out and just wanting to fight.
Fighting, yeah. I think that was what it was by the time I got to that scene. By the time I got to going to the Ventura Theater to see like the Vandals
or social distortion.
It was scary. Yeah, people wanted to punch you for no reason.
That's when I started getting out of it. I'm like, this is not what I thought it was. I like the music, but I don't need to like be a part of this.
That was another reason to outgrow it too.
Yeah. Well, so what was your we don't have to go into a ton of detail of your glory days, John. But
I think we should.
Yeah,
Dave.
let's sit down and do it. Let's map it out.
Joe, you can take a break. Go ahead.
Thank you.
How did you end up with a record deal? How did that happen? How did you go from getting this guitar at 13 to being in a band that had an album out?
I blew Paul Schaefer and he hooked me up.
That's what I was told.
That's wild, man.
Well, I went. Okay, so when I got out of high school, I directly went to L.A. to go to acting school.
Right.
And that was what I was going to do. I wanted to be an actor, and I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and I did 1 year there, and I just wasn't emotionally equipped to handle L.A.
Yeah.
I sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I would have stayed, but I just couldn't handle it. I missed home, and it was
you
funny
were a pussy.
Yeah. I was a pussy, and I was super.
I always heard that about you.
My brother can attest to this fact that I was a little cocky back then.
Oh my God!
And so I went
really difficult to be around.
I went from being a very big fish in a very small pond to being a microbe in an ocean in LA.
Angeles.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it was super hard for me.
John, he was in Greece at his senior year at high school at Buena, and he still
played Sandy.
Of course. Yeah.
He played the car,
the role
Grease
you were
Lightning,
born to play.
And he was Danny Zuko, and because of that, we still call him the Zucker.
That's one of the many nicknames I've accrued.
Ouch.
But so during that time I would come home. I was going to school down there, and I was trying to break into show business, which is really tough. And then also, my dad, God bless him, he'd moved down there. He got an apartment so I could live with him. My parents separated that year, and he was just alone, so he came down there.
God bless him. He left me living in a van down by the river.
You could have come with us. You chose
I wasn't invited.
So anyway, That's true. We did leave Joe behind, but
hey guys, what about me? Guys, mom, dad.
he was almost.
I'll just be here then.
You were 20 years old, but anyway,
I was a very young 20.
Yes, you were.
Yeah.
20. Yeah.
So I was down there, and my dad got stomach cancer at that time. So he got really sick, and I was helping take care of him. And actually, I'm really happy that happened because during that time, I got really close to my dad, which never happened before in my life. We spent a lot of time together. We talked a lot.
Imagine.
So do I need to get stomach cancer to become close with you?
It wouldn't hurt.
All right.
So
it'll hurt a lot.
While you guys talk, I'm going to work on that.
Yeah, but cancer will hurt. But it would. So you should just fake having. Okay. But so I was going back and forth at that time and playing a little bit of music and recording and stuff. And at one point I just said, you know what, I don't want to go back to LA anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I dropped out of school.
I know that feeling.
And I stayed here in Ventura. And then I put all my energy into the music thing with my friends. And then we started playing and we made a couple of records. And that nothing really happened for the first couple of years. And then the whole... the grunge thing happened.
Yeah.
And we started
which would have been in what, the early 90s?
No, it was
late
80s. Late. It was so in 1989.
Yeah, 89 was when the first Nirvana album I think came out.
Yeah, in 1989, our drummer quit our band.
Yeah.
So we got another drummer and we kept playing, but it never really worked again.
Yeah.
So
he was too good for you guys.
Maybe whatever. That might have been true, but he was a great drummer. But I remember
that was for you, Kelly Cunningham.
I remember thinking, I remember us just kind of going, let's just wipe the slate and start over again.
Right.
And so we found this guy, Sean Freeman, that came in as our drummer, and we got rid of everything we did. We changed the name of our band to Pinching Judy.
Yeah.
And we just kind of wanted to play punk rock, just not punk rock stuff, but like fast, 3-chord.
And that drummer, I used to play with Sean in another band, and he was a nut.
Yeah.
He played hard, and he
didn't know how to play finesse stuff.
He sounds like Keith Moon.
Well, he learned how to play listening to like Iron Maiden and Metallica
and the Carpenters.
He played left-handed, but he played
all the classic bangers.
Yeah. Karen Carpenter was a mess. I mean, a beast. But she was a mess too, though. Actually,
yeah, she was both of those things.
Yeah. But
you're already on one tangent. Don't get on a second one.
No, I'm just saying he learned how to play wrong.
He did.
He played right-handed, but he was left-handed, and he was just a weird drummer.
Yeah, that's true. He was. And he used to
powerful.
play in that little chair. So
That's right.
we and that just happened to be at the time that all grunge stuff was happening. And I remember we were trying to play. We played down in L.A. We were trying to get gigs down there, and everything on the Strip was metal.
Yeah,
it was all Poison and Motley Crue.
There's a documentary on Netflix called Sunset Strip that I watched recently. That's just about that whole change happening because that hair metal thing happening.
You drive down 80s. And you just see like hair and the chicks with hair and everywhere.
But it ended.
David, it was gone in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's what
it was gone in 2 fucking weeks. I swear to God.
Those guys were bitter as shit about it.
It was just gone.
Yeah.
And Nirvana killed metal dead.
Right.
They really did.
The guy, Mike Reno from Loverboy, is quote. He says that like
Nirvana destroyed us. Yeah. So we just happened at the time.
It was so radically different, and it had such an air of like authenticity or whatever you want to call it. It just seemed to just instantly prove the metal stuff like irrelevant.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah,
it was authenticity. It was
like when you stay with me here. So it's like when you take a bowl of water, you throw the pepper in there, and you put soap on your finger, and you stick it in.
Right,
it's just gone.
So like Nirvana was the soapy finger in a pool of pepper.
Can you auto-tune me to sound smart later?
Please.
You have that?
Yeah, I think we have that.
So
we have that now.
Okay.
At that time, there was a band that were friends of ours called Toad the Wet Sprocket out of Santa Barbara, and they were doing well. They'd gotten a recording contract. And
Glenn
Phillips.
Yeah.
And so they were friends of ours, and they'd gotten a recording contract, and they were doing pretty well. They were going on tour, and
they had a few big hits.
They did.
Yeah.
And they helped get the Mudheads connected to this ASCAP showcase process that was happening. And the Mudheads recommended us for the showcase. And a guy named Tom DeSavia brought us in to do a showcase. And that's, how we got our manager and got our lawyer and we got a songwriting deal and then we got a record deal.
So what's that like? You go to like a studio.
No, it was a club called it was called the Coconut Teaser.
And it's like an audition basically for a record contract.
It was like playing in a club, except instead of regular people there, it was like half of the people were industry people.
And are they smoking cigars and this is great?
It's funny because I went a couple of times.
You're no good, kid.
You're never gonna make it in this town. They'd be there to see a band.
Yeah.
It'd be packed.
Yeah.
And then the band would finish, and then the place would be empty.
Yeah.
Just empty.
Yeah. So you got a record deal out of that process.
Yeah.
And then you toured.
Many times. So we opened. We were the opening act for the Gin Blossoms a bunch of times. Smashing Pumpkins. We played one show with Soundgarden.
Yeah.
And then we did this thing called Rock Against Rape.
See, there was a feminist angle to a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely.
That was the age of the Lilith Fair.
Yeah, and like Riot Girl and like
that's right.
Bikini Kill and like all that kind of Kathleen Hanna,
Sleater Kinney.
A big part of it, like Kurt Cobain was kind of like, he wasn't necessarily like a queer figure. He kind of was though. I mean, he wasn't. I know he wasn't gay, but he played with that a lot. Like he
He actually said once that if he hadn't met Courtney Love, he would have been gay. He would have met a guy and felt
right.
Well, just they got inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame
recently.
And Nirvana, and so they had this show afterward. It was in New York. You remember hearing about that at all?
They played with Paul McCartney.
They did that. But then after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they went out and did this all-night show, Nirvana, with. They had all girl singers come in.
Oh yes, yeah, and that was definitely a nod to that.
Yeah, and there was and Dave Grohl in some interviews talking about like he wanted to have Lorde come in because his daughter liked her.
Yeah,
and I think PJ Harvey.
Yeah,
and then he thought, Kurt would love this. Let's just do all female.
That's awesome.
Joan Jett.
Well, it's like and Joan Jett was a perfect choice for that. Like this Rock Against Rape thing, it kind of fascinates me because it's like. You know what I mean?
What happened with Rock Against Rape?
Yeah.
It was actually a pretty big deal in all up and down the West Coast. There was a band called the Gits.
Yeah.
And they were out of Seattle, and they were starting to get a lot of buzz, and they were going to get signed. And their singer was a girl named Mia Zapata. She was gorgeous, really talented.
Yes. And she was murdered, right?
She was raped and murdered in an alley in Seattle at 2:30 in the morning.
Yes.
And so what Rock Against Rape was, all these people got together to ask the record labels. It was a really cool thing. They wanted the record labels to mandate that if you were a female employee, A&R person, musician, whatever, they would pay for you to take self-defense classes.
Wow, yeah. So, I do remember the self-defense classes being a part of that era too.
So we wanted girls to be able to beat the shit out of guys that are going to rape them.
Well, just protect themselves.
Yeah. No, beat the shit out of them. That would be better. Right. So that was what it was, and there was a lineup for bunch of different cities down the coast, starting in Seattle.
Right.
We played the LA area shows, and it was us and a band called oh my goodness, what were they called? The girls that 7 Year Bitch.
Yeah.
Us and 7 Year Bitch and Concrete Blonde.
Right.
And Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain headlined those shows.
Wow.
And so we actually. And I got to meet them, and we got to meet Kurt. Was unfortunately had to be exposed to Courtney Love. I just think she's a creature.
Yeah,
but
I think the history has kind of bled that out too.
You just don't get her.
He actually, our ASCAP guy, when he introduced me to him, he gave him our CD.
Yeah. And
about a month after those shows ended, I got a call from him, from the ASCAP guy, and he said, "Where are you guys?" We were on tour,
right?
And he goes, "Where are you guys playing in the next few days?" And I said, "Well, we're playing in Atlanta. We were also playing in Atlanta,
right?"
And he said, "You're going to be really happy about this." And I said, "Okay, what?" And he said, "Mark Cates from Geffen is coming to see you guys in Atlanta because Kurt Cobain took your CD in and said you were his favorite unsigned band. And he should go see you."
That's amazing.
So Cates came and saw us, and we talked to him a little bit. I don't know how into us he was, but they were playing at the Forum.
Yeah.
Nirvana was booked to play the Forum.
Uh-huh.
And we were setting it up so I could go see him, and I was going to come backstage and hang out and everything.
Yeah.
And about a week before that show, he killed himself.
Jesus.
So that fucker ruined my career.
Yeah. No, I think that's the lesson. The lesson we can all draw is that when Kurt Cobain killed himself, he also killed.
My dreams,
Yeah,
David.
I think
I
I think you have cause for a lawsuit.
I agree. I'm going to sue the estate of Kurt Cobain.
That probably would be a popular move right now.
Yeah.
Jesus. So I have another question that I've always.
I'm
wanted
going to
ask
sue
you guys.
Jesus, too. I'm sorry, go ahead. What?
86 Hastings. What is this place?
Let him talk about that. I lived there for a while. You did too, didn't
Everybody's
you?
lived
Yeah.
there.
This was an address of a house in Ventura near Buena High School, where I went to high school. I think 86 Hastings was maybe the first place I had a beer when I was 27. No, but during that age,
probably true.
This place had like some sort of cultural. What is that place?
Well, so our friend Brooke Dalton, who when we met him, we used to go water skiing up at this lake Buena Vista, and a friend up in Bakersfield, this shithole lake.
Yeah.
And one of our friends brought him up, and we just kind of became friends. And so anyway, he lived there. His father owned it, and I think his uncle lived there, and then he was staying there, and then the grown-ups moved out, and then he took over and started renting out rooms to friends. And a very long story short, there's been probably 100 people that have lived there. And
is it still going?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And they do, so his house is filled with art.
Yeah.
It started out just like friends would do artwork, but he's got like, I don't know the artist, but he's got, named artists on his walls.
Yeah. I think I've Googled it a little bit and found like that it's like it's a repository of local art.
Yeah, and he's got
it's also a place that had a lot of parties go on.
Yeah, it used to be
I felt like it was the center of like hipster culture in Ventura.
There was a lot of parties.
Go find your way to 86 Hastings, and I heard people as the years have gone on, and I've actually met people in New York that knew you guys.
Oh wow.
Or heard of you guys, or knew of you guys, and knew of this 86. Oh, are you an 86 person? Or are you an 86 Hastings person? And it's fascinating to me that that's how local culture functions.
Yeah.
And that there's like actually, it's not just a bar you go to, but there's actually a house that has some sort of like cultural cachet.
Well, Brooke is at the crux of that, because he has these friends that cycle through, and the people that have been living there now, I believe, have been there for probably the longest. But it's filled with art. But he does things like there's a scavenger hunt coming up. It's like the 12th
it's like
one.
An annual scavenger hunt.
Yeah, and it's this huge thing. I think I did it once. He also there was just the Visigoth, which is like they go up to Arroyo Verde Park, this big park in Ventura, and they do like these games.
Yeah.
And the people show up. It's tug of war and ice. I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
It's been years. And he does a lot of really cool stuff. He plays in several bands that travel through. They can crash at his house, and it's just kind of this. That's the counterculture element in Ventura. It's a huge. It's really a big thing.
It's where I first met Korg Ballard. Actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
My God.
That's where everyone first met Courtney Ballard.
Yeah.
He's a degenerate.
Yeah,
who did you meet in New York that had heard of us?
Who was it?
Courtney Love?
Yeah. Well, I know my cousin Natalie Hart.
That's your cousin?
Yeah.
Natalie Hart is your cousin?
Yeah.
And Steve Hart?
Yeah.
We were in love with Natalie Hart when we were kids.
Yeah, she's my cousin. She's my mom's sister's daughter. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does she ever ask about us?
All the time. But I think I knew you guys were connected through Facebook. But there are other people. I'm trying to remember that someone I met that was from Ventura that I'll have to think about it. That knew you guys, or had heard of the Lombardo brothers, and that's why I wanted to.
Our legend has grown.
Yes, it has.
Like a funk that goes across the nation.
Yeah, it stretches all the way to New York. That's why I wondered about the East Coast connection, because I think you post pictures, and I don't even know if it's actually your father.
Yeah, those are pictures of my dad.
Yeah.
And I had this guy stop me. I was telling you this before, but you cut me off, and I'm a little upset about it. But I was at the post office, I think, and I was talking to this guy, and he goes, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm here." And he goes, "You're not from New York?" And I'm like,
right.
"No." And he goes, I go, "Well, my dad grew up in and around."
He just said Jew under his breath.
I said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm a greasy wop." But I said, my dad grew up in and around Chicago and he's like, "Oh, that's where the accent comes from."
Yeah.
And I don't.
Right. That's what I mean. I picked up on this from you guys when I was young. I guess
I've gotten that my whole life.
Oh, you
when
have?
I remember when I went
Maybe it's the name Lombardo has a kind
Well,
of
it's
like
kind of
gravitas.
like I think it's like Smith in Italia.
when I went
Yeah.
when I went to acting school, I was 18. I just turned 18, and everybody there said, "Are you from Boston or New York?"
Oh, wow.
My whole
Yeah.
life, people have thought
Yeah.
I was from the East Coast. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys for sitting down with me. It's wonderful. Do we miss anything?
I missed you.
I missed you guys a lot.